on the coldest night of my 9th winter without her. I stood at a stranger's gate in the falling snow and understood, at last, that I had come to beg. I had been a king for 20 years. I had knelt to no one, not to the mountain packs who feared me, not to the southern alphas who envied me, not to my own dying father when he passed the gray crown of Greyreach into my hands and told me to hold it better than he had. I had held it. I had made Greyreach a name that men lowered their eyes to say. And now I stood in another snow with my cloak gone thin at the shoulders and my horse blown and steaming behind me, and I lifted my fist to a plane wouldn't gate the way a beggar lifts his hand to a door, not knowing if it will open or if it will be barred. The longhouse beyond the gate was low and long and warm. Light came out of its shutters in honest yellow bars and lay across the snow like spilled gold that had cooled without hardening. There were other houses around it, and pens where I could hear the shift and breath of sheltered animals, and a great fire pit under a roof of hides where I could hear voices, many voices, low and easy, the sound of people who are not afraid. I had ridden through 3 packs' lands to reach this place, and in every one of them I had heard the same thing when I asked the road to Crosswater. They had not asked my name. They had only pointed, and their faces had softened, and one old woman had said, "Ah, going to her, are you?" As though there were only one her in all the world and everyone knew who she was. I knew who she was. That was the whole of my ruin and the whole of why I had come. Her name was Ayla. 9 years ago she had stood in my hall in a borrowed gray dress with her hands folded, and I had looked at her the way a man looks at a stone in his boot, and I had sent her away. I want to tell you I did not know what she was. That would be a lie, and I have told enough lies about that day to last 3 lifetimes. The truth is smaller and worse. I knew, on some floor of myself below thought, the moment she came through my doors, I knew the way you know your own name, and I looked at her plain dress and her dowerless hands and her fading little pack, and I decided that I did not want to know it. A king does not marry a nobody. A king marries a treaty. So I turned my knowing off like a man snuffing a candle he has decided is too bright, and I let her walk out into the snow with nothing. I lowered my fist without knocking. I stood there a moment longer in the cold, and I let myself go back all the way back, because you cannot understand the size of what I threw away unless you see how it was given to me, and how freely, and how I refused it. Let me tell you, and do not whatever else think me a man wronged, I was not wronged. I was a fool, and the fool was crowned. The elders brought her. That is the part that shames me most. I did not even choose to seek her. My own gray heads chose it, the ones who had served my father before me, and they were not fools, whatever I was. There were 7 of them, and they came to me in the low council room at Greyreach on a bitter morning, with their hands tucked in their sleeves, and a look on their faces I had never seen in all my years of knowing them. And old Bevan, who had held me as a squalling pup and taught me the names of the constellations from the North Tower, said, "Torrin, there is a girl." I laughed at him. I remember laughing, easy and careless, a young king with the whole North bending toward him. There are a great many girls, Bevan. My counselors bring me 3 a season. Not like this one. He did not laugh back, and that stopped me because Bevan laughed at everything. It was his way of surviving old age. The moon sign is on her. We have not seen it in 100 years, not since your great-grandmother's mother, the one the old songs are made of, the one who walked between the axes at the salt ford and made 2 packs lay them down. This girl carries the same thing in her blood, Torrin. Do you understand what I am telling you? Not 1 pack runs in her. All of them she is a mender. Where she walks, the fighting stops. There is not a soul in the North her presence does not quiet. He leaned toward me over the old scarred table where 4 generations of my line had made their hardest choices. She is your match. I would stake my death on it, and I am old, so that is not a small stake. Meet her, Torrin. That is all any of us ask. Only meet her. Something moved in me when he said it. I will be honest with you, since I have been dishonest about everything else for 9 years. Something in me had already begun to hum, low and steady, From the moment the word girl left his mouth, the way a struck bell hums a half-breath before you have quite heard the strike. I did not name it. I did not want to name it, but it was there. Fine, I said, bring her. I will meet her to please 7 old men who wiped my chin, but do not weave me any songs about the moon. I have a map to fill. They brought her the next morning. She came into my hall on a gray day with snow melting off her shoulders, and she was not beautiful the way the women my counselors paraded were beautiful. She was beautiful the way a lit window is beautiful when you have been walking a long time in the cold and are far from any home. She wore a plain dress that had plainly been someone else's, too long in the sleeve, taken in at the waist with careful, honest stitches, and her hands were folded in front of her, and she had a stillness in her that made my loud, bright hall feel suddenly like a great deal of shouting about nothing. My hearth fires seemed to gut her lower. My warriors at the long tables went quiet without knowing why. She walked the length of that hall through all of it, unhurried, and she stopped before my high seat, and she looked up at me. She did not look away, and she did not stare, the way the ambitious one stared, measuring the crown. She only looked the way you look at a person you have been told you will spend the rest of your one life beside, taking their honest measure, without fear and without flattery. And the bell rang. I will not pretend to you it did not. Everything in me that was alpha and everything in me that was wolf turned toward her all at once, the way a whole field of grass turns toward the sun without deciding to. And for the space of one breath I was not a king at all. I was only a man who had walked his whole life half asleep and had just, in one gray morning, in one turn of a woman's steady eyes, come fully and terribly awake. My wolf, which I had thought I knew as I knew my own hand, rose up in me and pressed toward her and made a sound I had never heard it make. Not a hunter's sound, not a fighter's, a low, glad sound, the sound a beast makes when it has found the one thing it did not know it had been looking for its whole life. Mine, my wolf said, plain as speech, there, that one at last. And I looked at her borrowed dress. I looked at the too long sleeve and the careful stitches and the fading little pack she had come from, a poor holding 2 valleys over that could not have put a single warrior in my field or a single wagon of grain in my stores. I looked at the 7 old men standing along the wall with a fragile, breakable hope on their faces. And then I looked past all of them, through the great doors she had come in by, to the wall of my council room beyond, where the cold map of the North hung. The map I had studied since boyhood, with Greyreach at its gray heart and all around it, spread out like a feast a hungry man cannot stop looking at. The packs I did not yet hold. The rich Ashford lands to the south, thick with grain and long-legged horses. The river packs with their mills. The salt packs of the cold coast, whose trade could double my treasury in a decade. A treaty could take those lands. A marriage could take them without a single sword drawn. And this girl, this mender, this nobody with the 100-year moon sign the old men were near to weeping over, this girl came to me with nothing in her hands but the truth, and a hum in my blood that a strong king ought to be ashamed to feel for a bride who brought no dower and no swords and no map. So I did the strongest thing I knew how to do, the thing my whole life had trained me to do, the thing that felt in that moment like discipline and mastery and kingship. I killed the hum. I reached down into myself and I found the glad low sound my wolf was making, and I closed my hand around it and I choked it silent. It cost me something to do it. Even then, even blind as I was, it cost me, and I felt the cost like a small clean cut somewhere I could not name. But I was a man who had trained my whole life to pay costs and call them strength, and I paid this one and called it strength too. She is a healer, I said to the elders over her head, as though she were not standing 3 feet before me with her steady eyes on my face. Good. A hold always has need of healers. She may stay and tend the wounded in the lower rooms. I made my voice flat and busy, the voice of a king with a full day and small patience for it. But I have no time for songs about the moon and less for a mate who strengthens nothing. My marriage will strengthen this hold. That is what a marriage is for. That is what it has always been for. I heard Bevan's breath go out of him behind me, all at once, like a man who has taken a blow to the chest. And Ayla did a thing I did not expect, a thing I have carried like a live coal in my chest for 9 years, a thing that has burned me awake in the deepest hours of more nights than I can count. She did not weep. She did not plead. She did not, as I half expected and God forgive me half wanted, argue her worth to me, so that I might have the pleasure of being persuaded. She unfolded her hands slowly, and she looked at me with those clear, unhurried eyes, and for one moment only, I saw in them not the hurt I had braced for but something far worse, a kind of grief. Not grief for herself, grief for me. As though it were I who was the poor one, standing crowned and rich and blind on my high seat, and she who could see exactly how poor and was sorry for it, and knew there was nothing she could do. Then she inclined her head, the smallest bow, courteous, whole, without a grain of servility in it. "Then I will not stay to tend anyone," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it carried in the silent hall without her raising it at all. A healer's hands are given freely, or they are not given. I will not lend mine to a hold whose king is too proud to want the rest of me alongside them. That is not a fair trade, and I do not make unfair ones, not even for a king. She lifted her head, and she looked at me one last time, and there was no anger in it, which was somehow worse than any anger could have been. "I wish you well, Alpha King. Truly, I think before the end you will have great need of the wishing." And she turned, and she walked back down the length of my hall, unhurried in a borrowed dress with nothing at all in her hands, and she did not look back. My great doors were opened for her, and beyond them the snow was still falling, gray and steady, and she walked out into it and was gone, and the doors boomed shut behind her, and the sound of that shutting went through me like a spear from breastbone to spine, and I stood on my high seat and told myself, with a discipline I was very proud of, that it was only a door. The 7 old men filed out of my hall that day, and not one of them ever again looked at me the way they had looked at my father. Bevan died 2 winters later in his bed in the cold, and he never once spoke her name to me again, though I know now he spoke it often to himself, at the end, as a man speaks of a thing that might have saved everyone if only it had been let in. I did not go to him at the end. I was busy. I had a treaty to make. I made it. God help me, I made it well. Rowan of Ashford was the most sought-after Luna in all the southern reach, and she came to Grayrich in the spring after with a train of 40 horses and 12 grain wagons, and 100 of her father's warriors in polished mail. And when her veil was lifted in my hall, the men made a sound low in their throats, because Rowan of Ashford had been made, it seemed, precisely to make men make that sound. Her beauty was like a fine blade laid out on dark velvet, sharp, cold, brilliant, meant to be looked at and admired and never, ever touched with a bare hand. Her father, the Ashford Alpha, was a lean, gray, clever man who smiled always with his mouth and never once with his eyes, and who watched my hall and my stores and my warriors the way a moneylender watches a debtor's house. And at my elbow through all of it stood my counselor Aldrich, a smooth, warm-voiced, ambitious man I had raised up too high and too fast because he told me, always, exactly what I had already decided I wished to hear, murmuring of granaries and horse lines, and how the map, the beautiful cold map, was at last beginning to fill. I looked at Rowan's blade and velvet beauty, and I searched myself honestly for the hum, for the bell, for even the smallest echo of that glad low sound my wolf had made once on a gray morning, and I found nothing, nothing at all. A flat calm nothing, like a frozen lake, and I told myself with great satisfaction that this was exactly as it should be. A king does not need to be woken. A king needs to be strong and clear and unmoved. A woken king is a king who can be ruled through his heart, and I would be ruled by no one, least of all my own blood. We were wed on the longest night of the year, in a hall so heaped with Ashford gold and Ashford banners that it hurt the eye to look on, and I remember almost nothing of my own wedding, not the vows, not the feast, not the 100 toasts, except one thing, one single traitor thing that rose up in me unbidden at the very center of it. At the moment I took Rowan's cold and perfect hand in mine to speak the binding words, there came to me, sharp and sudden as a splinter working its slow way up through skin, the memory of another hand. A hand folded in a borrowed gray sleeve, and a low, even voice carrying across a silent hall without needing to be raised, saying, "I think before the end you will have great need of the wishing." I crushed it as I had crushed the hum. I was very good by then at crushing things. It was the one art at which I had made myself a true master. I will not walk you through the whole slow rot of the years that came after. A ruin is a dull thing to live and a duller thing to recount, one small cold morning after another, each one a little colder than the last, and no single one of them the morning where it all went wrong. But you should know enough of it to weigh me fairly, and not to think the ruin came upon me out of a clear sky. It did not. I built it, beam by beam, with my own 2 hands, and I called the building of it wisdom. The treaty was a treaty, and a treaty is not a marriage, whatever the words spoken over it. Rowan had never wanted me any more than I had wanted her. She had wanted to be a queen, the largest queen the Reach could offer her, and Greyreach was the largest crown on the board. And once she had it fixed upon her head, she found the north gray and the wind cruel and the halls cold and her husband a man of stone, and she never forgave any of it, and least of all me. We were unfailingly courteous to one another. We were entirely empty. We sat at the 2 ends of a long table each night and spoke of the weather and the stores and nothing that mattered, and went to separate cold rooms, and there were no pups, the one thing, the single thing, that a treaty most needs to become real, the thing that turns an alliance of paper into an alliance of blood. There were no pups, and there was never going to be, because 2 people who feel nothing whole and warm between them cannot, in the end, make a warm and whole new thing out of the nothing. Her father, the Ashford Alpha, understood this before I did. Cheated of the grandsons who would have bound his line to mine past all breaking, he grew colder still, and cleverer, and his promised grain began to come later each autumn, and thinner, and to cost, somehow, always a little more than had been agreed. His horse lines to my cavalry dwindled from a river to a stream to a trickle. And through every year of it my smooth counselor Aldrich stood at my elbow and told me, warmly, reasonably, that all was well, all was well. The delays were the weather, the costs were the times. The map was still filling. Even as I understand now, the walls of my house were coming quietly and steadily down around me, stone by stone in the night, while I slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who has silenced everything in himself that might have woken him. I learned much later, too late, as I learned everything too late, that Aldrich had been taking Ashford's gold in secret from the very first season, that the cold gray father-in-law and my own warm-voiced counselor had been 2 hands of the same purse the whole long while, tightening Greyreach's throat by inches, and telling me, in that reasonable murmur, that it was only a chill in the air. I do not tell you this to make myself the wronged one. I chose Aldrich because he flattered me. I kept him because he never made me feel a fool. I built the door through which my ruin walked in, and I hung it, and I oiled its hinges, and then I was surprised when it opened. There is no wronged man in this story but the one I wronged with my own hand, on a gray morning, over a borrowed dress. Remember that. I need you to remember that. And then, in the 9th winter, came the wolf sickness, and it broke what was left of us. It came out of the far north, they said, down through the high passes with the first hard cold, and it was a sickness such as no healer in living memory had seen, for it did not take the man first, it took the wolf. A strong warrior would wake one morning and reach inside himself for his beast, the way we all do without thinking, the way you reach for your own breath, and find only a gray silence where the beast had always been. And then, cut off from the wolf that is half a wolf-kind soul, the man himself would begin to wane, to gray, to shrink, to burn with a low, steady fever that no cold cloth cooled and no fire warmed. And in a week or 2, he would be gone quietly, staring at a ceiling, calling in a whisper for a beast that would not answer. It came to Grerich in the dead heart of the cold, and it went through my hold like a scythe through standing wheat. It took young Doran first, my gate captain's son, 19 years old, who I had watched grow from a fat laughing pup into the finest young tracker in 3 valleys, who had run at my own flank on the autumn hunt not 2 moons before, tireless, grinning, the whole bright length of his life ahead of him. He woke one morning and could not find his wolf, and he was gone before the moon had turned once, and his father held his hand at the last, and I stood in the doorway of that cold sick room, a king in his own hold, and I could do nothing. I could do nothing at all. It took old Mara, who had cooked in my kitchen since before I was born, whose bread I had stolen warm off the boards as a boy while she pretended not to see. It took the twin sons of my master of horse, both at once, in the same terrible week. It took my warriors in their strength and my elders in their wisdom and my children. It took the children, and there is a kind of silence that comes over a hold when the children begin to go that I pray you never in your life have cause to hear. I called for every healer in my lands and beyond, and they came, and they laid their hands on the sick and mixed their draughts and burned their herbs, and none of them, not one, knew this thing, and the fevered went on graying and shrinking and dying while the healers wept over their own useless hands. I sent south to Ashford for aid, swallowing what pride I had left, and I waited, and in the fullness of a fortnight there came back from my father-in-law a letter, very courteous, very fine, sealed with the Ashford horse, regretting, in the most polished terms, that Ashford could at this time spare neither healers nor stores nor aid of any kind, and wishing Grerich a swift return to health. And I sat with that letter in my 2 hands in my cold and dwindling hall, and I understood at last, all in one sick rush, that I had married a knife 9 years ago, and that the knife had been turned slowly in me the whole while, and that I felt it now, truly felt it, only because I was at last too weak to keep pretending I did not. Rowan kept to her southern warmed rooms through all of it, her hearths heaped high while my people froze, and we did not speak of the dying, and I think by then we had nothing at all left to say to one another. I sat alone at night in my great cold hall with the fevered coughing in the rooms beyond and the fires burning low because we were rationing even the wood now, and I thought, with the plain, flat, bottomless despair of a man who has come to the very floor of the well and found it stone, there is no one in all the wide north who will come to Grerich's need. I have made a hold that men fear, and fear does not come when you are dying. I have made alliances of gold, and gold buys no one who is not already for sale. I am going to sit here in the dark and watch the last of my people go, one by one, into the silence, and there is no one at all. And it was Kester who knelt down beside my chair, Kester, my war captain, gray now and scarred and slow in one leg from an old wound taken at my flank, the very last man in all my hall who still loved me plainly, and still told me the truth to my face without oiling it first. It was Kester who said the thing that turned the whole world over. "There is one Toran," he said, very quietly so that only I would hear. "Have you truly not heard? All these years have you truly in all these years not once heard?" "Heard what?" I said. My voice came out of me like a thing dragged over gravel. "Of the woman at Crosswater." He watched my face with his old steady soldier's eyes, and there was something moving behind them I could not then read. "They say she can hold the wolf sickness back. That the packs have been carrying their fever to her door for 3 winters now from valleys away, and that she sits up with them and that they come home. That she has done it 100 times and more. But that is only the smallest part of it, Toran." He drew a slow breath. "They say the wolves themselves go to her, the wild ones, the pack beasts, the lost ones, that they lie down at her feet like they will not lie down for any alpha living. They say no pack in the whole north will make war within a day's ride of her house, out of pure shame, because she is there. They say she has walked into feuds 100 years old with nothing but her voice and her table and her endless patience, and ended them, ended blood that kings could not stop with armies. They call her the mender of the north, The packs send her their orphans and their sick and their broken, and every alpha between the mountains and the cold sea has sat at her low table and gone home a smaller man and a better one. There is a woman, Torin, that the whole North kneels to of its own free will, out of love and not out of fear. And she holds no land, and she wears no crown, and she asks nothing of anyone. And she began 3 years ago, when she first came down out of the high valleys, with nothing at all in her 2 hands. I sat very still, and down in me, far down in the deep place I had walled up 9 years before and never once let myself go near, something had begun, very softly, to hum. Kester was watching my face, and now at last I understood the thing behind his eyes, and it was pity, and it was for me. 9 years ago, he said, gently, so gently, the way you tell a man a thing that is going to break him. 9 years ago she came out of the mountains on foot, alone, in a borrowed gray dress with nothing in her hands, and she made her way north into the broken valleys, and she began. She came from Greyreach, Torin. She walked out of these very doors. You were there, you saw her go. I do not remember standing. I remember only that of a sudden I was on my feet, and my cold hall was tilting slowly around me, and the coal I had carried buried in my chest for 9 long years had come all at once, blindingly, roaringly, to a fire that burned up through everything I had built over it. All the discipline, all the map, all the strength, all the crushing and the silencing and the calling it wisdom, burned it up like dry grass in a moment, and left me standing in the ash of it, naked and awake. And 9 years too late. Her name, I said, though I knew it, though I had always known it, though I had spent 9 years teaching myself, morning after cold morning, not to let it form in my mouth. Kester, say her name. Ayla, said Kester, her name is Ayla. She is the one you sent out into the snow. I will not dress it up for you or make it kingly. I wept. A crowned king, 20 years on the gray seat, a man who had knelt to no one and buried his own heart with his own hands and been proud of the burying. I stood in my cold and dying hall in front of my old scarred captain, and I wept like a boy, because I understood at last, all at once, whole, the true and terrible size of what I had done. The hum I had strangled, the bell I had snuffed. The glad low sound my wolf had made once, reaching toward a woman in a borrowed dress. There, that one at last, mine, and how right it had been, how completely right, how my elders had been right, and my blood had been right, and every last thing in me but my proud and frightened pride had been right. She had been my mate, not a metaphor, not a moon song, not an old man's fancy, my true and fated mate, the one soul the moon had shaped to fit the wolf-shaped hole in me, sent to my very door, folded hands and steady eyes, and I had looked at her dowerless hands, and I had thrown her out into the snow with nothing, to save myself the terror of being loved. And she had gone out into that snow with nothing, and out of that nothing, out of the very bottom of nothing, she had built the one thing I, with all my gold and all my swords and all my beautiful cold map, had never once managed to build in 20 years of trying, a North that trusted her. She had not conquered a single acre. She had mended them. And they knelt to her out of love, the way no one had ever once knelt to me, and I had had that, I had had her, standing in my own hall with the 100-year sign on her, offering it to me freely, and I had looked at her borrowed dress and sent her away. I have to go to her, I said when I could speak. Kester did not tell me I was a fool. He had earned over 40 years the right to tell me so, and he did not use it, and that was its own kind of mercy. He only looked at me a long, level moment, and then he said the truest and the hardest thing anyone had said to me in 9 years, and he said it plainly, because he loved me enough to. Go if you must, Torin, he said, but go knowing this, and do not let the road talk you out of it. She owes you nothing, not one thing. She built all of it, every mended feud, every saved child, every wolf that lies at her feet. She built the whole of it without you, and after you, and in spite of you. You are not riding north to a woman who has spent 9 years waiting at a window. You are riding to a woman who was better off the very day you shut the door on her. If you go, go as a man who knows that. Anything else and you will only wrong her twice. I knew it. I have never in all my life known anything so completely, down to the floor of me. And I went anyway, not to command her, not to claim her, not in the end even to save Greyreach, though Greyreach was dying around me as I saddled my horse. I went because a man who has spent 9 years teaching himself he is not thirsty will, when at last the truth breaks him open, crawl toward water on his hands and knees across any distance the world can put between him and it. I rode north into the deep cold with 2 men, and then in the higher passes with 1, and then I sent even Kester and the last of them back, because the way had narrowed to a track a single horse could barely hold, and I would not spend another life on my own reckoning, having spent so many already. I gave my rich fur-lined cloak to a shivering herdsman I passed on the second day, a bent old man driving 3 thin goats through the snow who looked at me with such open weary want that I could not ride past him wearing it. And I wore a thin one the rest of the way, and I was glad of the cold, if I am honest, because it felt like the smallest beginning of a payment on a debt I could never finish paying. And by the time I came down out of the mountains into the broken north, into the scatter of small poor packs that lay in the low valleys, I did not look like a king at all. I looked like what I had become, a beaten man in a thin cloak, alone, with snow in his beard and the end of himself in his eyes. And that was the strange, unlooked-for grace of the whole ride. Because no one knew me, because there was nothing kingly left to see, I heard the truth. I stopped in poor halls and warmed my hands at poor fires and was given, everywhere, a place and a bowl without a single question asked, and everywhere I asked the road to Crosswater, and everywhere the same thing happened, and it taught me, mile by mile, the full measure of what I was riding toward. In a low smoky hall on the 3rd night, an old man with a face like cracked leather told me, with tears standing bright and unashamed in his eyes, of his son. The boy had taken the wolf sickness in the deep of the last winter, he said, and had lain gray and shrinking for a week while the old man watched, and at last, past all hope, the old man had wrapped him in every hide they owned and carried him, a grown boy, on his own bent back 9 days through the mountain snow to the door at Crosswater, because a passing tinker had sworn to him there was a woman there who could hold the sickness back. And the woman had opened her gate to a stranger and his dying son in the middle of the night without a word of question, and had taken the boy in, and had sat up with him 4 nights running, never once sleeping, her hands on him and her low voice in his ear calling his wolf back the way you call a lost dog home through a storm. And on the 5th morning the boy had opened his eyes and reached inside himself and found his wolf there, answering. He runs with his pack again now, the old man said, and he had to stop and press the heels of his hands to his eyes. He has pups of his own coming in the spring, and that woman took not 1 coin from me, sir, would not hear of it. Said the only payment she wanted was that when I met a man on the road who was cold, I should let him in. So. He looked at me then, at my thin cloak and my ruined face. So you are let in, stranger. That is her payment, moving through the world. That is how it works. I could not speak. I sat by his fire and I could not speak at all. In a stone hall 2 nights further on, a young woman with a hard, closed mouth and watchful eyes told me, flatly, testing me, not trusting my thin cloak, of the feud. 2 packs in that low country, she said, had been killing one another for 3 generations over a river crossing, and 100-year-old murder that neither side could any longer even properly name. Fathers had raised sons on the hatred of it, and the ground between the 2 holds was salted with the graves of young men who had died for a quarrel their great-grandfathers had begun. And into the very middle of it, one spring, unarmed and alone and uninvited, had walked the woman from Crosswater. She had gone to the killing ground itself, the woman said, the disputed crossing where the last blood had been spilled not a moon before, and she had sat herself down on a stone in the very center of it, between the 2 holds, and she had refused to leave. The Alphas had come out in their fury, both of them with their warriors at their backs, and had found a plain gray-haired woman sitting on a rock in the middle of their war, waiting for them, and she had said only that she would not move until they sat down and talked, and that she had nowhere in the world she needed to be, and that she could wait a very long time. And she had. 6 days and 6 nights she sat there, the young woman said, through cold and rain, eating what the 2 suspicious packs grudgingly brought her, talking and listening, mostly listening, asking a question here, holding a silence there, until on the 6th night the 2 old enemy alphas, worn down not by force but by being at last truly heard, put their heads in their hands and wept, and then reached across her and clasped arms. My brother would be dead, the hard-mouthed young woman said, and her hard mouth trembled once and then set itself again. He was to fight in the raid they'd planned for that very moon. He's alive. He farms the crossing now, the 2 packs share it. There's a market there on the old killing ground. Children play on it. She looked at me a long moment. So if you've come to speak ill of her, stranger, or to take something from her, you'd best ride on. This whole valley would die for that woman, and she never lifted a hand or raised her voice to earn it. I have not come to take anything from her, I said. It was the first wholly true thing I had said aloud in 9 years. I came to give something back, 9 years too late. She studied me. Then she nodded slowly and pointed me the road and did not ask what. And on the last day, within sight of Crosswater at last, I came upon the children. A whole ragged tumbling pack of them, out in a snowy field with a lean, patient older girl minding them, and they swarmed to the fence to look at the stranger on the tired horse, fearless, bright-cheeked, loud. Orphans, all of them, the older girl told me, taken in from packs that had cast them out, or lost them to the sickness, or simply could not feed them through the hard years. There was no child in the whole broken north with nowhere to go, she said, because there was always Crosswater. And the children, tumbling over one another to tell it, told me that Ayla Mother had taught them their letters, everyone scratched in the ash by the fire, and their howl, so that even the wolfless among them, even the little human foundlings, had a voice to lift with the pack at moonrise. And the names of all the stars, the whole wheeling winter sky of them, from the hunter to the saltrode to the little cluster, she called the lost pups coming home. And that her house was the warmest house in the whole world, they said, and that she always kept one place empty at her long table, one bowl, one stool, one place, for whoever might come, expected or not, kin or stranger in the daylight or the dark of night. Even, one of the smallest said solemnly, tugging my stirrup, even a cold man in a thin cloak with snow in his beard who looks like he rode all the way to the end of the world. Which is what I was when I came at last on the coldest night of that 9th winter, to the plain wooden gate at Crosswater, and stood in the falling snow, and lifted my fist, and after all that, after the whole ride and the whole 9 years, knocked. A young man opened the gate, not a servant, I saw that at once. One of the taken-in, grown to a man now, with a steady, careful, open look about him that struck me so hard I nearly stepped back, because it was her look, her stillness, her unafraid measuring, learned at her table and grown into his own bones. He took in my thin cloak and my ruined face and my blown horse in one glance, and he did not ask my name or my rank or my business or where I was from. "Come in out of the cold, friend," he said simply, and stepped back to hold the gate wide. "There's soup on, and a place by the fire, and a stall for your horse. She'll want to know a stranger's come in on a night like this, she always does." And I stood there in the snow and could not, for a moment, make myself walk through his open gate, because I was thinking of my own great doors. The tall iron-bound doors of Greyreach, booming shut on a woman in a borrowed dress, 9 years ago on my own command. And here was this boy, whom she had taken in from nothing and raised into a man, opening a plain gate to a beaten stranger without a single question, because that was the whole of her law, the one law she had built her whole world upon, that the cold are let in, that there is always a place. I stood at the gate she had made, and I understood, fully, for the first time, the exact and unbearable distance between her law and mine, and I did not know how I would ever walk across it. But I walked. I led my horse through, and the boy took its reins and spoke to it gently, and I went up the swept path toward the light, toward the long, low, warm hall with its honest yellow windows, and I stepped through the door into the light and the low, easy voices and the smell of soup and wood smoke and safety. And there, by the great fire at the far end, with a sleeping child held against her shoulder and gray come into her dark hair where there had been none, was Ayla. She turned. She had felt me come in the way she felt everything I would learn, the whole weather of a room, and she turned from the fire, the sleeping child on her shoulder, and she saw me standing there in the doorway in my thin cloak with the snow melting off me, and across her still face I watched recognition come. And in the same moment the bond struck me. I have no proud words for it. I had killed it 9 years ago with my own hand, choked its glad low sound silent and buried it and built a whole gray kingdom over its grave. And now it came back to life all at once, and it did not come gently. It came the way feeling comes screaming back into a limb you have knelt on far too long, the way the blood floods roaring back into the dead white flesh, all fire and agony and unbearable life, the whole 9 years' numb length of me shrieking back into sensation at once. My wolf, which I understood only now had not slept one whole night through in 9 years, which had paced the walls of me the whole time, gray and starving and refusing every mate my counselors had ever paraded, howling at a moon it would not name, my wolf, at the sight of her, lay down. It simply lay down there on the floor of me and folded its long legs under it and put its great head upon its paws and let out a breath it had been holding, I understood, since the last time it had seen her walk away, and it was still. Utterly, finally still. Home, it said, without a sound. Every road I ever ran was this road. I only did not tell you because you would not have listened. And the fist I had carried clenched shut in the center of my chest for 9 years, the fist I had always believed was pride, the hard knot of it, I felt it open. Finger by finger in the warmth of that hall it opened, and I understood at last, with the child's plain clarity that comes only at the very end of a long blindness, that it had never once been pride. It had been holding on. All those years in the dark, without my knowing, it had been holding on to her. She crossed the hall to me. She stopped an arm's length away, no closer, and she looked up at me, taking my measure honestly and without fear, exactly as she had done 9 years ago in another hall, in another life. And I saw with a pain that was almost sweet that whatever I had done to her, whatever the world had done to her since, no one had ever taught her to look away. Torin, she said, not Alpha King, only my name, low and even, the child still sleeping against her shoulder. You look half dead. I am, I said, and my voice broke on the 2 small words. Ayla, I have come. I know why you've come. There was no cruelty in it, and I made myself here, no warmth either, only the plain, flat truth, laid down between us on the swept floor like a clean stone. Grarich is sick. The wolf sickness has reached your holds at last, I've heard. You've come for the mender. Her mouth did something that was almost, but not entirely, a smile. They all come for the mender in the end. It's a very long ride for a proud man to make. You must be tired. I did not come for the mender. No, she raised one brow, unhurried, unconvinced, waiting. No. And there, in her warm, crowded hall, in front of her grown, taken-in son and her sleeping foundling child, and a dozen mendied men at the long tables who had gone quiet and still to watch. There I did the thing I had ridden 9 years and the whole broken width of the north to do, the thing no counselor had ever advised, and no king in any song I knew had ever done. I went down. The Alpha King of Grarich, 20 years crowned, who had knelt to no living soul, who had buried his own heart to keep from having to bow it. I put one knee to her plain, swept floor, and then the other, and I knelt, and I looked up at her, and I let her see all of it, every last thing, the ruin and the shame and the 9 years and the fire come roaring back to life. I did not come for the mender, I said again, from my knees. I came for the woman I threw out into the snow. I came to tell you, before I do anything else in this world, that I knew what you were the very moment you walked into my hall 9 years ago. Knew it the way I know my own name, the way my wolf knew it and told me plainly, and that I took that knowing in both my hands and I killed it, because I was too small and too frightened a king to want a mate who came to me with nothing but the truth. I came to tell you that every word my elders spoke of you was true, and every word I spoke over your head was a lie I have paid for every single day since. I have been dying by inches for 9 years, Ayla, and I only understood why 9 days ago in a cold room out of an old soldier's mouth. You were my mate. You are my mate. I have always, always known it. And I looked at your borrowed dress and I threw you into the snow and you rose up out of that snow, and you built the one true thing in all the North, and you built it without me and after me and in spite of me, and my captain was right when he told me you were better off the day the door shut. You have never for 1 hour needed me. I know it. But here the last of my voice went, and I let it go. I let her see the whole broken bottom of me. But I have needed you every hour of every one of those 9 years, and I did not have the courage to know it until I had lost every other thing I built my life on top of it. I am not asking you to save Greyreach. Greyreach may fall. I have earned its falling beam by beam with my own 2 hands. I am begging only that you let me tell you what you are to me. That is the whole of it, even if you send me back out into the snow tonight. Even that I will take gladly, if only you first let me say it plainly once out loud where the world can hear. You were never a nobody. You were the whole of my luck, sent to my very door, and I was too small a king to hold it, and I have grieved that smallness every day of my life since. The hall had gone entirely silent. The fire spoke to itself in the great hearth. The grown son stood by the door with his hand fallen from the latch. The sleeping child stirred against her shoulder and did not wake. And Ayla looked down at me for a long, long time, the king of Greyreach on both his knees on her plain-swept floor, and I saw, watching her, that whatever the 9 years had done to her, they had not made her hard. That is the mistake I had braced for and feared. It was not hardness in her at all. The 9 years had made her free, which is a wholly different thing and a far better one, and it was out of that freedom, not out of any wound, that she now slowly weighed me. She was not deciding whether to punish me. I saw that, and it undid something in me. She was long past punishing me. She had been past it for years, had left it behind her somewhere on the road out of the mountains, along with everything else she did not need to carry. She was weighing a truer and a much harder thing. She was weighing whether the fire in her that I could feel answering the fire in me. For she felt the bond too. I could see it plainly now. She had always felt it. She had simply refused, with a wisdom I had not possessed at 20 and crowned, to build the one life she was given on top of a man who would not build his on her. She was weighing whether that fire, real as it was a thing she dared trust to a man who had once looked at her, and without a flicker, chosen a map. "Get up," she said at last, very quietly. "I will not speak to any man on his knees. Not even you, Torin, no, especially not you." I got up. "You want the truth," she said. "It was not a question." "Then here is the truth, all of it, and you will hear it standing. I felt it too, that gray morning in your hall, the bell. The whole of it the same as you, the field turning to the sun. I walked into your cold gray house and I looked up at you on your high seat and I thought, clear as a bell struck at midnight, there he is, the one, at last. I was ready, Torin. I had come with nothing, but I had come with my whole heart open in my 2 hands. And then I stood there and I watched you look at my borrowed dress, and I watched you look at your map on the wall behind me, and I watched you decide I was a stone in your boot. And I understood, standing there, a thing it seems you needed 9 years and a dying kingdom to learn, that being a man's fate is not the same thing as being a man's choice. The moon can hand a man his mate on an open palm, and if the man is too proud to close his hand around her, the moon cannot make him. I would not spend my one life as a treaty a king settled for. I would not spend it as a healer he kept in a back room, grateful for the roof, watching him warm another woman by his fire. So I took the single thing you left me, nothing, the whole clean nothing of it, and I walked out into your snow and I went north and I built a life where I am chosen, every single day, by every soul who comes to my gate, for exactly and only who I am, with nothing owed and nothing bought. And I will tell you now, so you carry no false hope out of here, I do not regret 1 hour of it, not one. I would do the whole of it again, the cold and the hunger of the first year and all of it, sooner than go back and be your settled for queen. Do you understand me plainly, Torin? I do not need you. I have never from that morning to this one needed you at all. I know, I said, that is why I love you. She stopped. Whatever she had braced herself to hear, it was not that. I watched it go into her, past the freedom and past the guard, down to some place I had not been sure was still there for me to reach. Her steady eyes moved once. Say that again, she said low. I do not love you because I need you, I said. I spent 20 years making sure I needed no one, and I was very good at it, and it cost me you, and it cost me everything, and I would burn all of it again to unlearn it sooner. I do not love you because you can save my hold. Send your healers to Greyreach or do not. Help my dying people or do not. You will help them, I think, in the end, because that is simply who you are, and it will have nothing whatever to do with me, and I will not use their fevers to buy 1 inch of you. I did not ride 9 days to the end of the world as a king to a mender. I came as a man to the one woman he was given and threw away, and has grieved for waking and sleeping for 9 years. A woman who does not need him and never will, and is whole and free and beloved of the whole North without him, and whom he loves past all sense and past all use exactly because of it. That is the truth, Ayla, laid down. The way you taught me the worth of truth, by walking out of my hall and saying you would not make an unfair trade even for a king. For a long moment, the only sound in all the warm hall was the fire. And then Ayla did the second thing that I have carried since, and will carry to the last day of my life, and that undid me more wholly than any word she could have chosen. She shifted the sleeping child gently to her other shoulder, and then she reached up, this woman the whole broken North knelt to, who had built with her own 2 hands a life that did not need me and never would. She reached up and laid her open palm flat against my cold, wind-scoured cheek. The way I understood, she must have laid it 1,000 times over on the fevered and the frightened and the lost who came to her gate in the dark. And she said, very low, so low that only I in all that hall could hear it, "You foolish, foolish king, 9 years." And I turned my face into her hand there in front of them all, and I felt the bond close over the both of us at last, not like a chain, and not like a claiming, and not like any song I had ever been sung, like a wound. A long, open, 9-year wound finally allowed to close, and my wolf, lying on the floor of me with its head on its paws, let out its held breath and slept. For the first time in 9 years, in the warmth of her hall, with her hand against my face, it slept. I stayed the winter at Crosswater. Not as a king. I hung no banner over her gate. I gave no order under her roof. I sent no word ahead of me down the valleys that the Alpha of Greyreach was in residence. I hung my crown, in truth, on a peg by the door the first night, and left it there, and it gathered dust, and I did not miss it. I carried water from the well in the gray mornings until my soft king's hands cracked and then hardened. I split wood in the yard until I understood at last in my shoulders and my back the plain daily labor that had built the warmth I had walked into out of the snow. I mended a fence. I mucked the stalls. I sat in the evenings not at the high seat. There was no high seat at Crosswater. Her chair was only a plain chair at the head of a plain long table, but at the low end, among the petitioners and the newly come and the taken in, and I ate from the bowl kept always for whoever came, and I learned the names of the orphans, one by one, and their letters scratched in the ash, and their howl, and the whole wheeling winter sky of their stars, from the hunter to the little cluster she called the lost pups coming home. And I learned, slowly, clumsily, wrong more often than right, from watching her at her work, from watching her sit up a night with a fevered child, from watching her wait out a hard silence at her table, until a bitter man finally spoke the true thing under the bitter one. I learned the single art I had never once learned in 20 years upon the gray throne of my fathers: how to make a place that people are not afraid to come into. She let Greyreach send its sick. I sent word to Kester, and my fevered came, wrapped in hides on slow carts down the mountain roads, and she took them in the same as any others without a question and without a price, and she held the sickness back, and my people who would have died, lived. And when the first thaw softened the passes, she went herself, north to south, up into Greyreach, and walked into my grim grey dying hold the way she walked into everything in this world, unarmed, unhurried, unafraid. And she went from sick room to sick room with her low voice and her steady hands, calling lost wolves home, and my hold did not fall. It lived. My people lived. And they did not know, at the first, that the gray-haired woman ladling broth in their sick rooms, and sitting up through their worst nights, was the dowerless nobody their king had thrown out into the snow 9 years before. When they came to learn it, and they did learn it, for such things are never long hidden, they knelt to her too, the whole grey hold of Greyreach, in the halls where I had once let the doors boom shut on her. And she bade them get up, everyone, and would not have it, and said she would not be knelt to under any roof, hers or mine, for she had not carried a single one of them 9 days through the snow, and it was the carrying and not the crown that ever earned a knee. The Ashford Treaty I let fall. There was nothing left in it to hold but cold gold and colder pride, and I had learned the price of both. Rowan went home to her southern warmth with her father's grain wagons empty and her father's grey clever schemes ended, and I think, at the very last, we were both of us quietly glad, she to be free of a stone king and a grey wind, I to be free of a knife I had at last found the strength to draw out of my own side. Aldrich I turned out, once Kester laid the whole 9 years of Ashford's secret gold bare before me. I did not hang him, though the old law allowed it and my counselors urged it. I had made too much of my ruin with my own hands to go looking for a single man to load the whole of it upon. I turned him out into the world with what he could carry, which is more mercy than he showed my dying people, and less than I had learned that winter to wish I were the kind of man who could show anyone. And when the new counselors, the honest ones Kester chose to stand in the emptied places, asked me carefully, watching my face for the old stone, what great Luna I would now take to strengthen the shaken crown of Greyreach, I laughed. A true laugh, the first that had come up out of me whole in more years than I could count. And I told them the crown was strong enough, and had once, 9 years gone, been offered a strength worth more than all the gold and grain and horses in the Reach, and had been too blind and too proud to close its hand around it, and that it would not, while I drew breath, make that one mistake twice. Ayla did not become my Luna the way the old songs would have made it. I did not stop a grand ceremony, or throw my royal cloak across her shoulders, or command the packs to bow. That had never once been her way, and by that spring it was no longer mine. We were wed in her own plain hall at Crosswater on an ordinary morning at the very edge of spring, with the last snow going soft in the yard and the first green just breaking at the wood's edge, and the orphans threw early flowers they had gone out at dawn to find, and old Kester stood witness and wept openly, and without the least shame, and Bevan's own grandson stood for the 7 elders who had been right, all of them, and had not one of them lived to see the rightness come home. And when it was done, she did not come south to rule Greyreach from a high seat beside my own. That was never the shape of it, and it is not the shape of it now, and it is not the shape I would have if I could change it. I go to her. That is how it is between us, and how I want it to the marrow of me. When the grey crown weighs too heavy on my head, and it still does some seasons, for a crown is a crown, I ride north out of the mountains to Crosswater, and I put the crown on the peg by her door where it has always gone, and I take my place at the low end of the long table, among the petitioners and the mendied and the taken-in and whatever cold stranger has been let in that night, and I am the least of all the men who serve her, and there is no seat in all the wide north, not one, that I would trade for it. They say now the packs and the old wives by their fires, and the orphans learning their winter stars, that every alpha in the whole North kneels at the door of the woman at Crosswater. And it is true. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have seen the proudest alphas of the Reach, hard gray men who once lowered their gaze to speak my name, go down without a flicker of shame at her plain wooden gate, for no more than a place at her table and a share of her patience, and the mending only she can give. And of all the alphas who kneel to her in all the wide kneeling North, there is one who kneels first and lowest and gladdest of them all, one who kneels not for any mending, but for the pure and undeserved grace of being let after everything through her door. I was that man's king once. I sat above him on a high gray seat, and I threw the whole of his luck out into the snow with my own 2 hands and called it wisdom. I am only glad, past all my telling, past the reach of any word I own, that the moon was kinder to her than ever I was, that she rose, that she did not wait at any window for a fool to come to his senses, but went out into the cold and built her worth where no proud king could ever take it from her again. Because it means that when she reached up in her warm, bright hall and laid her open hand against my cold and beaten face and called me softly a foolish king, she did it freely. Not because the moon had bound her to me, not because she needed me or my crown or my gray and shaken hold, not for any reason under heaven but one. Because, after all of it, and against every grain of sense the hard world had taught her, she looked at the ruin of the man who had thrown her away, and she chose him anyway. That is the last thing, and the only thing, and the whole of what I have, and I would not trade it for the gray crown of the North, nor for all the wide kingdoms under the wheeling winter stars. She keeps a place at her table for whoever comes in out of the cold, one bowl, one stool, one empty place always, even for a beaten man in a thin cloak with snow in his beard. Even for a king. Even for me.